Hello, everybody. So we really need to talk about this New York Times article that came out over the weekend. I'm talking about this one here that depicts the incredible way and the hidden, the secret history of the West's war with Russia fought in Ukraine. I'm calling this incredible because for anyone watching this channel or other channels who've been talking about this proxy war for the last 3 years, you will know that, of course, the United States was a main belligerent in the entire affair. But for the longest time, for 3 years, we've been told that the US and the Europeans are not part of the war, right? That they're supporting Ukraine, that they're just helping, that they're just delivering weapons. And over the last 1 year, the West actually started slowly changing that narrative. And this article here is really as deep as and as quite as disturbing as it gets in the way in which now the New York Times, the paper of record, keep in mind, it's the so-called paper of record. If it's in the New York Times, it is, to the American mind, engraved in world history. And the way that this world history is now written, or in what kind of tone it is written by the journalist, if you can call him that, the propagandist who made this piece, Adam Entus, um, is really quite incredible, and it's just the level of admissions that we are now getting of how this war has been conducted by the United States is fascinating, and this is not the first such article that we are getting. There was another one, pretty almost exactly a year ago, by actually the same guy, this Adam Entus or Entus. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I mean, the same journalist who wrote this piece here about the spy war, how the CIA secretly helps Ukraine fight Putin. So last year he publishes this piece here in which he, already came out with a lot of information that we've been talking about on this channel before, that we've been discussing, of how deep of course the roots of US integration and militarization of Ukraine goes. But that was for at least 2 or 3 years at that point still considered a conspiracy theory, right? And then the New York Times comes out with admissions that already in 2016 the CIA began training an elite Ukrainian commando force, and that the CIA also helped train a new generation of Ukrainian spies who operated inside Russia, and so on and so forth, right? All of these admissions of how deep the CIA's network inside Ukraine goes, and how long the precursor was to the start of the special military operation, right, in 2022, and how the West really did militarize, and how the United States did prepare Ukraine for fighting against Russia, and what the goal of all of that was. And now we get by the same person a second article, and this is not just an article, this is half a book. It's a huge, huge article that goes very long and very and it's very extensive, but it's clearly a narrative. It's built up as a narrative. It's built up as a hagiography. The saints of this the history of the saints who fought this war and who thought about it and who were methodically working on winning it, and this kind of victory, the victory narrative about the good Americans and the brave Ukrainians, and then certain mistakes and mishaps on the way to to the success of warfare, which of course then ends in non-success, which then the article toward the end, of course, culminates in the point that, oh, now Donald Trump threw it all out, and the Ukrainians in fact screwed it up. That's the main argument of the article. The Biden administration did whatever they could. The U.S. General Staff, the U.S. military was doing splendidly and was giving the best of good advice, but screws up on the Ukrainian sides who didn't implement the strategy well enough, and then the political change in the United States is basically changing everything. But let's start with the beginning. Let's start with the fact that the article establishes very clearly that Ukraine was never alone. It was never just supported with weapons. It was directly, the whole war was directly guided by the Americans and directly that operations was done by the Americans. And the article even quotes people who said apparently that the US is now an integral part of the kill chain. The kill chain. So without the US, without US intelligence, without US um, coordinates and back office support, the Ukrainians wouldn't be able to kill Russians, right? And then the article actually celebrates more or less the dying of Russians and the successful killing of Russians. It's a really disgusting article on many different levels, and I will show you a couple of the most disgusting things now. The big admission here is that what happened in Kiev didn't just happen in Kiev. Everything was basically planned from the American side. That the commando, the operational headquarter was in Wiesbaden in Germany, and that the US, that Russian, excuse me, that Ukrainian generals regularly went to Wiesbaden, and that the connection between Wiesbaden and Kiev was direct, and that these people really also went to Wiesbaden to Germany to get direct orders from the United States of what to do. Of course, the article frames it in a way that always makes sure that the Ukrainians look as if though they asked for it, as if though this was the Americans extending a helping hand, unwillingly. They didn't really want to, but in the end they stepped up and they took over the responsibility that they had as that shining city on the hill, and actually helped the underdog, right? Helping the underdog to win a war. That's the narrative here. I cannot show you the entire article. A, it's much too long. B, it's behind a paywall. But I did make a couple of screenshots just to discuss this with you. The article. The article speaks about in the beginning that on a tactical level, the partnership yielded triumph upon triumph. Yet, at arguably the pivotal moment of the war in mid 2023, the strategy devised in Wiesbaden fell victim to the factious internal politics of Ukraine. So this is really, at the outset of the article, it describes itself, and this is the story that this propagandist creates. That this was all going well, this was so brilliant, and of course they use the early victories of the Ukrainians in 2022, right after the Russians changed their strategy and went from trying to scare the Ukrainians into making a deal into a long war of attrition, which is, by the way, something the article never discusses. The article never ever says that from the Russian side, this after April, May 2022, morphed from scare tactics into an attrition war. It never mentions that. It keeps pretending that all the Russians are about is territory. And whenever the Ukrainians win territory, it's a great victory for the Ukrainians. And whenever the Russians advance a little bit, it just shows that they're not able to advance more. No point does this article ever discuss the pivotal aspect that for the Russians, ever after summer 2022, it became clear that this war would be a war about destroying NATO infrastructure and destroying all of the Ukrainian forces, and just killing and destroying the everything that NATO could throw at Russia inside Ukraine. The article never goes in there, and you can see how disingenuous this entire narrative is. But it gets very bad in the level that this so-called investigation tries to depict the tries to turn around, the utter dependence of the Ukrainians, and how the Ukrainians were really just the executioners of orders that came from Washington. How it tries to shape that into something more understandable to the Western mind, right? As a partnership instead of a clear and utter vertical integration in which the Ukrainians were ordered to go and die for the tactical dreams of the Anglo-Americans. It's really surprising. And in other programs like on the Duran, and also Andrei and also other commentators, they discuss whether this is a proxy war or not. And I think Alexander Mercouris made the point that this is it's a war, a coalition war, actually. That this article is also an admission that it is a coalition war. And I'm not sure. I don't think we have a proper word for what this war actually is. Now that we have all of these admissions, also on the table by the side who was fighting it, and who was conceiving of it primarily, because a proxy war, usually you have the great powers who then have proxy forces who fight each other instead of the great powers. But here we have Russia that is actively that is fighting inside another state, and is fighting the combined forces and the combined potential of a hostile military coalition. So this was a Russia NATO war, or is a Russia NATO war in all but name, right? This is NATO actually trying to take on the biggest of its supposed enemies without ever admitting to it, and by constantly pretending that this is not what is actually happening, in order to prevent Russia from going all out, which they actually did. They actually confined the fighting, NATO, Russia fighting, onto the territory of Ukraine, but they did so in very, very brutal ways. So the article actually says a New York Times investigation reveals that America was woven into the war more intimately and broadly than previously understood. Again, previously understood. Any observer of this war understood this. If you just went for the if you didn't go for the media narrative and media spin in the West, but if you actually looked at proper military analysis, and if you did also follow the political activities, and look at how the Ukrainians did fight, or were able to fight only with the intelligence and the support of the Americans, and also the Brits and French to some extent. And this so the fact that we didn't have official British and French and American troops on the ground is really only just one layer of the war fighting that was going on. It was decided by the Americans that this war would be fought with Ukrainians, and to the last Ukrainian, actually, as we will see as well. Um, Here we have the article, giving us these pictures, and to paint this heroic image of the Americans with the Ukrainians looking at maps and making joint decisions, right? When in fact the article leaves no question about who was in charge of everything, right? We have this passage here. The story of the partnership shows how close the Americans and their allies sometimes came to the red line, how increasingly dire events forced them, some said too slowly, to advance it to more perilous grounds, and how they carefully devised protocols to remain on the safe side. And they're talking, of course, of the red lines of the Russians, because these people, and the article here admits too, were aware that the Russians might go nuclear at any point in time, right? And that this might become a all-out nuclear third world war, and that these people were willing to take that risk. That this is the level of madness that these militarist psychopaths actually went into, instead of negotiating an end to the war, instead of in April 2022 having a compromise, having a neutrality agreement for Ukraine, having the Istanbul agreements signed. Instead of that, they wanted to go all the way to the Third World War if necessary. And post facto, this propagandist now tries to make you believe that this was carefully crafted, everything was well calculated, and it was always taken care that nothing would escalate. I mean, these people, the adults in the room, were in charge to make sure that the red lines were not crossed. It is an absolutely stunning piece of propaganda. Finally, the military and then the CIA received the green light to enable pinpoint strikes deep inside Russia itself, is one of the admissions that we read in this article. So, yes, it was the United States that gave the green light to do all of that. All of the levels of escalation NATO was then suddenly firing, using its intelligence and so on to fire NATO equipment into Russia proper. All of that was signed off, of course, by the Americans, by Washington. And while they still pretended that they're not part of this, that all of the operational decision making is up to the Ukrainians, no, it wasn't. The operational decision making was done by the United States. This was and the article here admits exactly this. This was the US deciding where and when to kill Russians. Period. They just did so. And they all while pretending that it is the Ukrainians, right? The article then also it even gives the picture, right, of the protagonists, the heroes of the narrative for the Minister of Defense, Mr. Austin, who's praised over and over again, right, how good he was. General Cavoli and General Donahue, the Americans in the U.S., and General Milley in the U.S., right, and then. Very interestingly, of course, only three Ukrainians who get some part to play Defense Minister Reznikov, then the General Sirsky, who later became the head of the Ukrainian armed forces, and this General Zaborodsky, who was the main liaison guy on the Ukrainian side, according to this article, right? And it's just fantastic how this article is over and over again praising the militarists under the Biden administration, of how brilliantly and they analyzed the situation and how well they were able to kill Russians time and again, and of course always escalated. And don't give the Russians any agency either, right? They're just there. They were just like. They were just exterminated by the Americans, and they really celebrate this. There's this passage. There are passages here that are absolutely revealing also the way that that this person uses quotes, right? At the international conference on April 26th at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, General Milley introduced Mr. Reznikov and a Soluzhny deputy to Generals Cavoli and Donahue. These are your guys right here, General Milley told them, adding, "You've got to work with them. They're going to help you." Bounds of trust were being forged, says the article, when the quote of the people that he cites actually say, like, you must engage with these people. So this is a command, right? This is obviously the Americans just sitting the Ukrainians down and telling them what to do, and establishing a chain of command that then goes from the Americans down to the Ukrainians, who then have to implement. That this is then still framed as bonds of trust were being forged is amazing. And the article takes well care to explain that also on the personal level, right? To create this hero story. You can see how this person thinks in terms of Top Gun. This is a Top Gun movie to the person who wrote this. And he's spinned a Top Gun level of narrative here. Absolutely disgusting. And just to drive the point home, how incompetent these people in actuality are, we are given a little passage about General Donahue, who was apparently a star in the clandestine world of special forces, because alongside the CIA kill teams and local partners, he had hunted terrorist chiefs in the shadow of Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Afghanistan. Like being a American psychopath who goes around the world killing people, being in a kill team to kill foreigners in foreign soil and just execute them, right? That's the person that is being lauded here as the highest, as one of the best Americans in Europe, who was commanding the Ukrainians in the beginning. This Donahue monster, psychopath. Uh, I mean, I can't but he's not only a psychopath. He's also. I mean, these people are also useless psychopaths. Just read this. As a leader of the elite Delta Force, he had helped build a partnership with Kurdish fighters to battle the Islamic State in Syria. And now just blink for a second and remind yourself that who is now the government of Syria? That now the government of Syria is ISIS offshoot al-Nusra, and that now you have al-Jolani, who is ruling Syria, right? With the okay of the West and of these people. I mean, he is hailed as somebody who fought these people just in order for all of these places to blow up. And Afghanistan too, right? Afghanistan is ruled again by the Taliban. These people were killing and raping and plundering Afghanistan for 20 years just in order for the Taliban to be replaced by the Taliban. And they were raping and plundering and pillaging Syria just for Syria then to be ruled by the people that they apparently, Islamic State, that they apparently fought against. And then we conveniently forget about that. So this is one of the protagonists on the American side. This psychopath, Donahue, is one of the of the protagonists. And it goes on and on. The article says that quotes that a lot of countries wanted to support Ukraine, this Ukrainian recall, but somebody needed to be the coordinator, to organize everything, to solve the current problems and figure out what we need in the future. I said to the commander in chief, we have found our partner. And of course, this Ukrainian here talks about or is depicted as talking about the Americans, right? The Americans stepped up and did support Ukraine, and this is how the article rationalizes this integration and this utter capture of the state. I mean, Ukraine was completely, totally captured, including the military being captured and being subdued and being used as a tool by NATO to fight the arch nemesis Russia. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And this General Donahue explained that the Ukrainians were the ones fighting and dying, testing American equipment and tactics and sharing lessons learned. Thanks to you, Donahue said, we built all these things that we never could have. The level of admission is astounding. It's astounding. I mean, that Donahue is being quoted as thanking the Ukrainians for doing the dying, right? For being the sheep being led to the slaughterhouse, and is actually thanking them for that. It's mind-boggling. And then the most disgusting part of the article is that it goes three times into complaining about the Ukrainians not sacrificing even more people. Here, read this passage. The Ukrainian draft age was 27. General Cavoli, American General Cavoli, who had been promoted to Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, implored General Zaluzhny to get your 18-year-olds in the game. But the Americans concluded that neither the president nor the general would own such a political fraud decision. I mean, can you listen to this language that this person used? Get your 18-year-olds in the game. This is dystopian stuff. We are talking here about an American general ordering their Ukrainian counterparts to sacrifice the young kids. 18-year-old boys and girls are kids. They're we The brain isn't even done developing until the age of 25. And this person wants these Ukrainian children to die for the plans that the Americans are making, and the Americans then order the Ukrainians to implement. And when the Ukrainians don't implement the way that the Americans want to, then they complain about it. And then the article actually blames the Ukrainians for not succeeding. And then these people demand even younger blood, even younger flesh. I mean, vampires are more humane. Animals are more humane than this. This is utter cruelty. These bastards, and General Cavoli and so on, who demand the blood of the Ukrainians instead of the negotiations, instead of what could have been had in April 2022, instead of actually talking and telling and negotiating with the Russians, they want younger blood to die for them, to be spilled for them. It's absolutely disgusting. These decisions involving life and death and what territory you value more and what territory you value less are fundamentally sovereign decisions, a senior Biden administration official said, explained. All we could do was give them advice. So, the article comes back to this and saying like, oh, we advised, but then the Ukrainians didn't take it. And the Ukrainians went for this plot of land and defended Bakhmut instead of what we said to go out and so on. It tries to spin everything back to the Ukrainians not listening and not being smart enough, while also saying that the Ukrainians, again, they should have just sacrifice more people. Let me just give you maybe this one here. Again, Austin, the U.S. The Secretary of Defense, would later recount how he contemplated this manpower's mismatch as he looked out of the window of his armored SUV sneaking through the Kiev streets. He was struck, he told aides, by the sight of so many men in their 20s, almost none of them in uniform. In a nation at war, he explained, men this age were usually away in the fight. Just can you can you grasp the utter disregard that this Austin, that Secretary Austin has for human life? That he wants these people in the at the front, these 20 odd year olds, these kids in the front, people who should go be at university, and he says like, no, 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 they shouldn't be at university, they should be at the front lines, they should be dying for what we tell them, because we have a mismatch, right? This was the point, like, of course, in 2024, when it became clear that the Russians heavily, heavily, heavily outmatch the Ukrainians, and that the Russians can not only don't have to use conscription, they have enough volunteers to fight, and the Ukrainians don't. And this is the point where the Americans again were pushing for more Ukrainians, the last Ukrainians, to be sacrificed. This is the kind of people, this is the kind of monsters, utter militaristic beasts who would, once the 18-year-olds are all dead, who would conscript the 16-year-olds, then the 14-year-olds, then the 12-year-olds, then they would send grandmothers and grandfathers to die, and then they would probably they poisoned their own children, right? That's what the Nazis did. That's what the Germans did, right? The leadership started poisoning their own children. This is the Nazis. This is Nazis. Like this is the Nazi mentality. This is Nazi German mentality, like expressed by the Secretary of Defense Austin here, of like how you have to sacrifice ever younger generations, and instead of giving up, instead of using other tools, you just go on and on. This is the stuff that the Japanese were not willing to do. The Japanese, they surrendered in 1945. They gave up because they were not willing to sacrifice another 2, 3, 4, 5 million of their people, which they knew that they would have to do if the Americans landed on the shores of Japan and had to do a fight here, and more than Okinawa, in Honshu and so on. The Japanese said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to sacrifice. We rather surrender, and we take whatever will come out of surrender. But we're not going to go to this level of barbarism against our own people. The problem here, of course, is that the Ukrainians are not American people, right? The Ukrainians are expendable. The Ukrainians are sacrificable. The Ukrainians can be slaughtered. It won't hurt domestically. And this is the evil, evil, brilliant genius of the Americans, who figured out how to enlist foreign nations to fight their war. It is disgusting beyond, really beyond my thinking. And it's just, again, like toward the end of the article, Mr. Awesome pressed Mr. Zelensky to take the bigger, bolder step and begin drafting 18-year-olds. And the article talks about this not just as a matter of fact, but kind of as in, this is what should have happened. This was important. And again, the Ukrainians resisted. And this is the one thing where I must commend the Ukrainians and Zelensky, that he didn't do that. I mean, this is this bit of national um, thinking for national well-being that actually prevented the Ukrainians from going to this level, that they said, no, we cannot sacrifice the entire next generation. We've sacrificed enough. This, the article, beyond just being a testimony to beyond being just a testimony to the level of integration, military integration, and operational integration, is also a testimony to just the sheer inhumanity of this entire affair. And the fact, of course, that on the other side, the Americans knew that the Russians were doing this war of attrition, right? They knew that this is all about who stands longer and who has the better fighting capacity. And the Russians had the better fighting capacity, and the Russians are decimating. The Russians always said, Putin is on record saying, like, well, we bleed them we bleed them. They will, if they, the more people they throw at us, the more of them we kill, and it is absolutely horrible. But this is what it is. This is the war, and from the Russian side, this is just as horrible. But from the American side, knowing that this is what you're engaging in, and knowing that the alternative diplomatic negotiations, the way that they're taking place now, right? The way that right now the US president decided, let's change strategy. And you actually have talks, right, happening in Riyadh. You actually have a peace process. That this was knowingly rejected by the Americans while blaming the Russians for not being willing to talk, who said we are willing to talk, who were almost at the verge of having an agreement in April 2022 and had so many times before, also with the Minsk agreements and so on. It's a horrendous crime. A horrendous crime. And the fact that this article is still part of the spinning of the story toward a heroic narrative in which this crime is not a crime but a virtue, it robs me of a lot of my belief in humanity. But to a large extent, it is ignorance. It is, and it's interlocking ignorance. It's interlocking stupidity of so many stupid actors because this stupid journalist who wrote this stupid piece obviously believes he's on the right side of history and he's just now getting his, lining up for a Pulitzer Prize because he wrote the secret history of this war. Stupidity will go down. Will go down because of this lack, this inability to 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 just not kill each other. Uh, a horrible piece. A horrible piece. If you have to pay for it, don't. If you can get the article for free somewhere, just like convince yourself of the inhumanity of the West by just going through this article. Good night.